It's time to make it, just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Welcome to You Can Make It. I'm David Farrell. In today's episode, we're going to make one of my favorite desserts of all time, cherry cobbler. Cherry cobbler is so tasty, it is so delicious, and it is so easy to make, you'll want to make it often. We're going to start by making the filling for our cherry cobbler. Here's something you can know to make life easy for you. You can also go to the store and buy canned pie filling of any kind you like and make any kind of cobbler you like. But it's way better if you make it yourself. We're just going to start by putting in 1 1/4 cup of white sugar. And we're going to add 50 milliliters of cornstarch to the sugar. And we're just going to stir the two together to make a mixture of the two. Don't worry about getting it too mixed up, you just want to have it blended in. Then we're going to add 1 liter of pitted cherries. Sour cherries are better. I can only find sweet, so I'm using sweet cherries. So that's 4 cups or 1 liter of cherries. We're also going to add 3 milliliters or half a teaspoon of vanilla. And we're just going to mix these ingredients up to totally coat the cherries with the sugar and the cornstarch. So once you kind of got them covered up, we're going to go over to the stove and we're going to put them over medium heat to cook the filling. I've been heating this for about 7 minutes, and you can see it's come to a nice boil. We're just going to let it boil and continue to stir it for 2 minutes and then take it back to our work area. We've got the cherries on the heat pad over where my workspace is, and we're going to add 1/2 cup or 125 milliliters of brandy. Now, at this point, it depends on how your eye likes it. If you like it looking bright red, you might want to add some red food coloring. Otherwise, it can look a little purplish. So I'm just going to put a couple of drops of red food coloring in, just to boost the color up. Once you've got it all stirred, just put it into a 2-quart casserole dish that I've sprayed with some baking spray, because that's what we're going to cook our cobbler in. So we're just going to pour the contents of the pot into the casserole. And now we're ready to make our topping for it. So I'm just going to get this out of the way. Clean up my workspace, and let's start making a topping for our cobbler. I've put my dry ingredients in the bowl, and the dry ingredients are 250 milliliters or 1 cup of flour, 15 milliliters or 1 tablespoon of sugar, 7 milliliters or 1.5 teaspoon of baking powder, 2 milliliters or a half teaspoon of salt, and 5 milliliters or 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. And just mix those dry ingredients together. Just one thing about the cinnamon, it gives you a good idea when you got them mixed together because it changes the color of your contents. Once you've got them mixed together, we're going to cut in 1/4 cup or 50 milliliters of margarine or butter. So that's 1/4 cup or 50 milliliters of margarine or butter. Try and make sure it's cold because it'll give you a better consistency. Just put it in, and we're going to use a device called a pastry blender. Just use it to cut through the butter and keep mixing it until you get a crumbly consistency. The trick is to not make it smooth and fine, because the butter will actually give it a bit of consistency if it's in chunks just a bit smaller than a pea. So just keep mixing it up until you get a crumbly, coarse meal type mixture. As you can see, that doesn't take very long at all. So you're looking for little pieces of butter to still be in it. You can see there's little chunks still in there, just like that. That's what you're looking for. So once you've got it mixed into a meal-type mixture, you're going to add 1/2 cup of milk. Now you want to sprinkle it over. You don't want to just pour it in. And you're not trying to mix a batter like a cake or a dough like you would for bread. You just want it to moisten the dry ingredients. If you beat it too much, it'll end up being like a bread instead of a biscuit. A cobbler is a biscuit, sweet biscuit type crust. So there we go, it's all moistened. So we're going to bring back our filling. And we're going to spoon that topping over the filling. Just drop it by spoonfuls on top of the filling. Just spread it around. And now that you've got the topping on that, we're going to take this over and put it in the oven. I'm just putting this in a 400-degree oven for 25 minutes. We've let our cherry cobbler cool for about 15 minutes, so it's still warm. It's good warm or cold, but I like it just a little warm. So we're going to serve it up now. So we'll just get our serving bowl over here, and we'll take a spoonful of the cobbler and put it into the bowl. Make sure you get some of that nice thickened sauce in there too. And what is cobbler if you don't have ice cream? We'll just put a ball of ice cream in with our cobbler. Now, if that doesn't look like a piece of food art, I don't know what does. The only thing better than looking at it is tasting it. And I can hardly wait to try my cherry cobbler. So a little bit of ice cream, a little bit of the crust, and let's give it a taste. The crust, the biscuit part, isn't too sweet, which is exactly the way I like it. The cherries have a rich cherry taste. The brandy gives it a little bit of refinement. And of course, who doesn't love ice cream with their dessert? This is a wonderful dessert, and you can make it.
In this recipe, David made cherry cobbler. The ingredients for the filling were 300 milliliters of sugar, 50 milliliters of cornstarch, 1 liter of pitted tart cherries, 2 milliliters of vanilla, 125 milliliters of brandy, and optionally, a few drops of red food coloring. The ingredients for the topping were 250 milliliters of all-purpose flour, 15 milliliters of sugar, 7 milliliters of baking powder, 2 milliliters of salt, 5 milliliters of cinnamon, 50 milliliters of margarine or butter, and 125 milliliters of milk. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. And as always, you can make it. It's time to make it. Just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Thank you for joining us on You Can Make It. I'm David Farrell. Do you know anybody who doesn't like hot chicken wings? Well, surprise, surprise, there's lots of people who just find them too spicy. For them, today's recipe is perfect. It's called salt and pepper wings. It's a basic wing that just has a touch of spice from the pepper, but not enough to scare even your grandfather or your grandmother. This is a really good wing that isn't too spicy. The next best thing about it is incredibly easy to make. So let's not hold up, let's make some salt and pepper wings. I'm going to start with some onion powder, and I'm just going to take 1/4 teaspoon or 1 milliliter of onion powder and just sprinkle it over 12 wing segments. You'll note I've got all drumettes here. You can cut up your own. It just is that the supermarket happened to have drumettes today. And then we're going to take 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder and do the same thing. And just sprinkle that over each of the wings. And then we want to get the other side, so we'll flip them over. And repeat the seasonings. Just a little bit. And these are ready to go on our gas grill. I'm out here at my gas grill, and I've got the burners turned down to medium low. You want to cook your wings slow so they get crispy but are cooked through. So don't fire it up really high. You're just going to put your wing segments on the barbecue, and they're going to take 12 to 15 minutes to cook depending on how much heat your barbecue generates at low flame. Also, you could cook these in an oven or in a smoker at 350 degrees for 50 minutes, turning them once while you're baking them. Just put them on a rack and bake them if that's more convenient for you. But we'll let these cook for a few minutes. Our chicken wings have been cooking for about 15 minutes. I've turned them 2 or 3 times. You want to measure the internal temperature in the thickest part to make sure it's over 170 degrees, because that means it's safe to eat. You also want to have a nice golden color on them like this. So we'll just take them off and take them inside to finish them. You'll note I got a clean plate. You can't use a plate that had raw chicken on it because it'll contaminate the chicken you just cooked. Okay, let's go inside. We brought our chicken in from the gas grill, and I have here 1/4 cup of melted butter and 2 teaspoons of cider vinegar. Just mix them together. Then get a large mixing bowl and put the chicken wings, I got about 12 of them here, into the bowl and add the vinegar and butter. Now just take them and toss them around to coat them evenly. There will be some left over, don't worry about it, it'll be just fine. But you want to get it on because that helps the salt and pepper stick. So we're going to take the plate back and put the wings onto the plate. What we will be doing now is just adding a little bit of salt and pepper to make them salt and pepper wings. So I've got in here about a teaspoon of kosher salt, and I'm just going to put about 1/2 teaspoon and sprinkle it over each of the wings. Then I'm going to give them a good grating of pepper. How much pepper you put on depends on your tastes. I like quite a bit. Again, flip them because you want to get all sides coated. And then we're going to add the other 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt. The reason you're using kosher salt is it's a little bit coarser and gives a better texture on your tongue for the surface. And then more pepper. Now, when you're doing this, you want it to look pretty, so you don't want to leave it on the working plate. You want to get a nice plate to put them on to serve them so they look good. What we're going to do now is my favorite part of every one of the episodes, and that is try the wings. These are going to be so good. Grilling makes them really juicy. The vinegar just gives it a little bit of cutting of the fat of the butter And the salt and pepper takes you back to your childhood when your mother put salt and pepper on everything. This is a great wing, and you can make it.
In this recipe, David prepared salt and pepper wings. The ingredients used are 12 chicken wings, 1 milliliter of garlic powder, 1 milliliter of onion powder, 50 milliliters of melted butter, 10 milliliters of cider vinegar, 5 milliliters of kosher salt, and fresh ground black pepper. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. And remember, you can make it. It's time to make it. Just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Thank you for coming to this episode of You Can Make It. I'm David Farrell. Today I'm going to make something special, a real treat. It's called candied salmon. Smoked candied salmon has been around for generations, and it is something that is a treat that has been loved by all those generations. There's a reason it has always been so popular. I've got some really nice wild sockeye salmon that I've picked up to make today's candied salmon. And with no further ado, let's get to it. The first thing you do when you make candied salmon is you brine it. So we have to make a brine. And we're starting off with my brine, which is 3/4 of a cup or 175 milliliters of water and 125 milliliters or half a cup of brown sugar. Now that's for 1 pound of salmon. If you have 2 pounds, double it. If you have half a pound, which I do for this piece, cut it in half. But I've mixed the brown sugar and the water together in this bowl. And then we're going to add some seasonings to it. And we're going to add 3 milliliters of dried ginger. We're going to add 2 dried bay leaves, 40 milliliters of kosher salt. Now you'll note I've got half of that here because I've got half a pound, but we just put that in with the water and the brown sugar. We also want some allspice. Allspice comes in whole pods, and you want to use the whole pods for this. For a pound, you'd use 6 or 5 or 6. For half a pound, 3. Just put the pods on a cutting board and give them a little crush, and then put them into your brine. Once you've got it in the brine, we're going to be going over the stove to heat it up and dissolve the brown sugar. I've put the brine on a burner and I've got it set on high, and you just want to stir it until it starts to look brown and a little clear. It should only take about 1 minute. And then there we go. It's all dissolved. You can't see any crystals in there. Here's my nice little piece of wild sockeye salmon. You can use any salmon you like, but the higher the quality, the better the result. You'll note when you get a fillet of salmon from the store that there's little bones that run right along there that stick up on parts of it. You could leave them in, but they're just kind of nasty for whoever's eating your salmon. So we're going to wash up a pair of homemade pliers and just grab the bones and pull them out. It just makes for a nicer product. Now it's possible that one of these bones, like that one there just did, the end will pull off and you can't get a grip on it again. Just let it go. But try and get as many of them out as you can. As you get down closer to the tail, there won't be any down here. So I've got my pin bones out. Now let's cut it into chunks because candied salmon's normally served cold as an appetizer in small pieces. So cut it to a size you like. I like to give a nice one. Now the skin's going to be hard to cut through. That's just the way it is. So cut it into chunks. Now when it gets a little thinner like this, I like it to be a bit bigger chunks because they're getting less fish in the thin pieces. And we just have it cut into chunks. So I'm just going to bring over the brine we made, and I'm going to put the fish in a container I can cover overnight and pour the brine over the top of it. Now that's got to sit in the fridge overnight, and it'll be stirred around once or twice overnight. So we don't have to wait around though. I have some here that I put in brine overnight, and it's ready to go outside and take to my cold smoker. I've brought my salmon out to my gas grill, and I'm going to show you a trick to turn your gas grill into a cold smoker. This device here is called a smoke generator, and what it is a perforated tube, and I've put some hardwood pellets in it. I'm going to light one end, and it's going to slowly smolder down and give off smoke without giving off too much heat. So I'll just light up the end of it with my propane torch. You've got to let it go for a good 30 seconds to a minute. You want a good flame. And we're going to let that flame burn down so that it's just got some embers. And then we're going to give it another blast to make sure it's going well. And let that flame burn down. While it's burning down, I'm just going to move it to the bottom because I'm going to put my salmon on the top rack. It's going to be hot at that end, so make sure you lift it from this end. And there we go. Now, while that flame's burning down, I'm just going to give it a little blow. And there the flame goes out, and it's giving off smoke. So I'm going to take the salmon, and I'm going to put it on the top rack so that it will be exposed to the smoke without getting too hot. On a hot day, you can put a tray of ice in here to keep it even cooler, because the cold seems to help the salmon take the smoke. This will be just fine though. And I'm going to smoke the salmon over cold smoke for 4 hours. You can leave this step out if you don't like very smoky salmon, but you need some smoke on candied salmon or the texture isn't right. Because the salmon in the cold smoker is going to take 4 hours, I cold smoked this salmon last night for 4 hours, and then you want to let it sit in the fridge overnight covered so that the flavor of the smoke works its way throughout the salmon. Now I'm going to put it in my hot smoker, which I've got preheated to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And you just want to put the salmon in the hot smoker. Now to make it candied salmon, you got to put something sweet on them. So you have two choices. You can mix up 2 parts of honey with 1 part of water, or you can use maple syrup. I'm going to do a little bit of both. So these ones on the right, I'm going to do with maple syrup. And I'm just going to brush them with a good layer of maple syrup. The ones on the left, I'm going to brush with 2 parts of honey and 1 part of water. And that's just a different kind of candying. And then I'm going to close that up, and I'm going to smoke it in the hot smoker for between 80 minutes to 2 hours. And I'm going to brush it every 30 or 40 minutes with more of my chosen topping. You want to check when they've finished smoking to make sure the temperature is over 145 degrees Fahrenheit, and then your salmon is done. I like to let it sit overnight before I serve it because it's traditionally served cold. To avoid having to wait a couple of hours, I made some yesterday, and we can go inside and taste some finished candied salmon. Here's some smoked salmon, the candied salmon I made. I made this over the last couple of days so that we can just get right into trying it. This is the honey candied salmon. This is the maple. You'll note they've got a nice shiny glisten. They've got dark spots on it. You can even smell a little bit of the smoke, which is exactly the way I like it. But the real test is, how does it taste? Well, let's try a honey piece first. I like to break it open, and you can see it's nice and dark pink throughout, and you can see that it's not really, really dry and hard. It's still got some moisture left. A really nice background smoke flavor just a touch of sweet from the honey. Definitely a delicious piece of candied salmon. Now let's try some of the maple. Same thing, let's break it open, and you can see the same color, but it's a little darker. Just maple gives it a little darker color. Let's just give it a taste. The maple gives it a little bit of a different sweet profile, a little bit more complex. It's really whatever your preference is. But you now know that candied salmon is a wonderful dish, it's easy to make, and you can make it.
In this recipe, David made candied salmon. The ingredients used were 500 grams of salmon fillet, 175 milliliters of water, 125 milliliters of firmly packed brown sugar, 40 milliliters of salt, 3 milliliters of dried ginger, 2 dried bay leaves, 5 whole allspice pods crushed, and maple syrup or honey diluted with water. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. And as David would say, you can make it.